Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
Drake Vallon knew something was off the moment the doors slid open. The sterile air of the alien research station was usually quiet, but today it hummed with an unnatural energy. As one of the few humans in this part of the galaxy, Drake was used to being an oddity, a curiosity among alien species who couldn't comprehend how humanity had survived its chaotic evolutionary path. But today, the stares lingered a little too long, the whispers felt a little too close. The station's chief scientist, Lyra Calvas, a tall, lithe Zoltrian, greeted him with an intensity he had only seen in her during high-stakes experiments. Her silver skin glowed faintly under the harsh lighting, her violet eyes narrowing as she examined him. It wasn't the usual friendly look she had given him before. "Drake, we need to talk," she said, her voice carrying that ever-cool Zoltrian calm, but underneath it he could sense tension. Drake raised an eyebrow. "This isn't about the report I was late on, is it? I swear I'll get it in by—" "No," Lyra cut him off, her slender fingers brushing her hair back as she beckoned him into a nearby lab room. "It's about you." He hesitated before following her inside, the sterile metal doors closing behind them with a hiss. The room was filled with floating holoscreens, each one displaying different data points and biological scans that looked vaguely familiar. Drake's brow furrowed as he realized all the screens were showing his own biological data. His heart rate, his immune system, his everything. "I ran some tests after the last physical checkup you had," Lyra began, turning to face him, her eyes locking onto his. "There's something wrong with your biology." Drake chuckled, shaking his head. "I've been hearing that for years. My doctor back on Earth used to say the same thing when I survived that fire with barely a scratch." "No, Drake." Lyra's voice turned serious, her hands hovering over one of the holoscreens, pulling up a more detailed scan. "This goes beyond anything we've seen in other species. Your body, your biology, it's different." "Different how?" he asked, moving closer to the screen. "Your pheromone levels spike when you're resting," she said, tapping on the data. "Most species release pheromones in specific situations: mating, danger, high stress. You're releasing them constantly. It's a low-grade field, almost undetectable unless you know what to look for. But the effect it's having on the station—" Drake's heart skipped a beat. He had noticed the strange looks, the odd behavior from his colleagues. But pheromones? That didn't sound right. Humans weren't that different. Or were they? "You're saying I'm walking around giving off some kind of aura?" Drake asked, half amused, half confused. Lyra leaned closer, her eyes narrowing as if she was trying to figure out how to say it delicately. "It's not just any aura, Drake. It's affecting everyone, every species differently. For some, it's triggering fear responses, but for others—" She trailed off, her gaze flickering to his lips before she caught herself. "For others?" Drake pressed, crossing his arms. Lyra shifted uncomfortably, a rare sight for the usually composed Zoltrian. "For others, it's triggering attraction. Intense attraction." Drake blinked. "What? Like, you're saying people are attracted to me because of some pheromone thing?" Lyra's cheeks flushed a pale silver, and she looked away briefly before nodding. "Yes. And it's not just physical attraction. It's like your body is tuned to incite some primal response in those around you. I've seen different species reacting in ways they usually wouldn't: staring, lingering touches, even heightened emotions." Drake tried to process the information. "So, you're saying I'm walking around making people attracted to me? Just by breathing?" Lyra sighed, turning off the holoscreens. "It's more than that. Your biology is somehow amplifying the natural instincts of those around you. You're not even aware of it, but you've essentially become a living catalyst." Drake leaned back, rubbing his temples. "This is insane. You're saying I'm some kind of walking aphrodisiac for aliens." Lyra didn't laugh. She didn't even crack a smile. "It's more serious than that, Drake. The longer you stay on this station, the more dangerous it becomes. Some species aren't equipped to handle such powerful stimuli. There's already been a few incidents with the Yaltrogs losing control in your presence." Drake stared at her, disbelief washing over him. "You're serious?" "Deadly serious," Lyra replied. And if we don't figure out how to neutralize this ability, more could be at risk. Drake fell silent, his mind racing. He had always known humans were considered strange by other species, but this was a whole new level of bizarre. So, what now? He asked quietly, his voice tense. We need to isolate you, study what's causing this, Lyra said, stepping closer, her violet eyes locking onto his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. You'll have to stay here, under observation, until we can control it. Drake smirked, trying to lighten the mood. So what? You're going to keep me here like some kind of pheromone-fueled lab rat? Lyra's lips twitched into a faint smile. Something like that. As she spoke, the tension in the room thickened. Drake couldn't help but notice the way her gaze lingered on him, the subtle shift in her posture, the way her breath seemed to quicken ever so slightly. And then it hit him. Even she wasn't immune to whatever was happening. Lyra, he began, his voice soft, you're feeling it too, aren't you? She didn't answer immediately, her silver cheeks flushing as she turned away, busying herself with the holoscreens again. We'll start the test tomorrow, she said, her voice a little too controlled. Drake sighed, leaning against the wall, realizing just how much trouble he was in. This wasn't just a scientific anomaly. It was going to be a lot more complicated than that. Drake Vallon sat in his isolated quarters, trying to make sense of everything. He'd been here for a few hours, but his mind was still reeling. It was strange, the idea that his body was triggering intense responses in the alien species around him. The notion was both amusing and terrifying. But the quiet hum of the station, the sterile surroundings, and the faint echo of his thoughts did little to calm his growing sense of unease. The door chimed softly. Drake looked up as the door slid open, revealing Lyra Calvas, still as poised and elegant as ever. Her silver skin gleamed under the artificial lighting, and her violet eyes fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something deeper. I thought we were starting the test tomorrow, Drake said, his voice sounding more casual than he felt. We are, Lyra replied, stepping into the room and letting the door slide shut behind her. But I wanted to speak with you privately first. Drake leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. Is this another warning about my dangerous biology? Lyra's lips curved slightly, but it wasn't quite a smile. Not exactly. She moved closer, sitting on the edge of the small table near him. There are some things the data doesn't explain, things I've observed but can't quantify. Drake's eyes narrowed. Like what? She hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words. Like how your presence changes things. It's not just pheromones, Drake. It's something more subtle, more primal. Drake raised an eyebrow. Primal? Lyra's gaze flickered, and he noticed the faint tremor in her fingers as she rested them on the table. Yes, she said, her voice softer now. I've been feeling it too. There it was, the confession he had been half expecting. He'd noticed her reactions earlier, the way her eyes lingered a little too long, the way her breathing quickened when she was near him. But hearing her admit it out loud made the situation even more real. I don't think it's something we can ignore, Lyra continued, her violet eyes meeting his with a vulnerability that was rare for her species. It's affecting me just as it's affecting others. Drake swallowed hard, feeling the tension in the air grow thicker. He didn't want to be responsible for whatever was happening, but it was clear that he was. And what exactly do you want me to do about it? He asked, his voice low. Lyra's fingers twitched, and she glanced down at them before speaking. We need to explore it further. We need to understand the full extent of what's happening before it gets out of control. Drake's heart thudded in his chest. He could feel the pull between them, that invisible force drawing them closer. You're talking about more than just tests, aren't you? Lyra's eyes darkened and she stood, moving even closer to him. The distance between them felt too small, too intimate. I'm talking about finding out what this connection is. Why it's happening. And why I can't stop thinking about you. Drake exhaled sharply, his mind racing. This was a dangerous path, one that could lead to places neither of them were prepared for. But as Lyra reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm, the choice seemed to slip from his grasp. Her touch was electric, sending a shockwave through his body. It wasn't just her pheromones reacting to his, it was something deeper, something that made his blood pulse with an intensity he hadn't expected. Her gaze locked onto his, and for a moment, neither of them moved. Lyra. She silenced him with a sudden, soft kiss, her lips pressing gently against his. Drake froze, his heart hammering in his chest as the world narrowed to just the two of them. He could feel her breath, warm and shaky against his skin, her body trembling ever so slightly as she leaned into him. But then, as quickly as it had begun, she pulled back, her eyes wide with shock. I didn't mean to, she stammered, her hand flying to her lips as if she could erase what had just happened. Drake swallowed hard, trying to calm the storm inside him. Lyra, we need to stop. This isn't just us. It's whatever's going on with my biology. Lyra took a shaky step back, her face flushed with embarrassment. You're right. I'm sorry. This wasn't professional. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the war between her logical mind and the instinctual pull that was dragging them both into dangerous territory. But they had to keep their heads clear. If they didn't figure out how to control this, it could spiral out of control fast. Lyra, we need to find a solution. Not just for us, but for the whole station. If this is affecting you, then who knows what it's doing to others? She nodded, regaining some of her composure. You're right. We'll figure this out. Together. There was a pause, a long moment where the air between them still crackled with unspoken tension. Then, Lyra turned and left the room, the door hissing shut behind her. Drake stood there, staring at the spot where she'd just been, his heart still racing. Whatever was happening to him, it wasn't just biology. It was something far more dangerous. And if they didn't find a way to stop it, the consequences could be catastrophic. Drake Vallon paced the small confines of his quarters, the weight of Lyra's kiss still lingering on his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening to him was bigger than just some biological anomaly. The data, the reactions, everything pointed to something far more primal, something that defied explanation. And now, it wasn't just about pheromones or attraction, it was about control. The door chimed again, and Drake's heart jumped. He wasn't sure he was ready for another confrontation, but this time, the person who stepped through was not Lyra. It was Commander Yarrick Thal, the station's security chief, a hulking Daeneryn with dark skin and glinting red eyes. His presence immediately filled the room with an ominous energy. Vallon, Thal growled, his voice a deep rumble that reverberated through the metal walls. We have a problem. Drake tensed. I'm aware. Thal's eyes narrowed, his thick arms crossed over his chest. It's worse than you think. There have been incidents. Drake frowned, feeling a pit form in his stomach. What kind of incidents? The Yaltrogs, Thal said, his voice darkening. They attacked 2 researchers on level 12. Completely unprovoked. They were fine 1 minute, then something snapped. We've already isolated them, but they're not responding to treatment. Drake's mind raced. The Yaltrogs were known for their calm demeanor, a species that prided themselves on their emotional control. For them to lose it like that? Thal's gaze bore into him. This started after your arrival, Vallon. Whatever's happening to you is spreading, and it's affecting more than just your immediate surroundings. The station is on edge, and we can't risk this escalating. Drake rubbed the back of his neck, his thoughts spinning out of control. You think this is my fault? I know it is, Thal growled, stepping closer, his towering figure casting a shadow over Drake. Your biology is messing with everyone. It's not just about attraction, it's driving some species mad. Drake felt his chest tighten. He had known something was wrong, but to hear it confirmed like this, he was a walking catalyst for chaos. So what do we do? Drake asked, his voice low. Thal's eyes flashed with intensity. We have to contain this. I've already spoken to Lyra. She's working on a way to neutralize the effect. But until then, you need to stay under lockdown. Drake's hands clenched into fists. He hated the idea of being locked away like some kind of ticking time bomb. But he knew Thal was right. If this got any worse, the station could be facing a full-blown disaster. I'll stay here, Drake said reluctantly. But you need to let Lyra keep working. Whatever's causing this, it needs to be stopped. Thal gave a curt nod before turning to leave. We'll keep you informed. As the door closed behind the commander, Drake sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his mind racing. How had it come to this? He'd been sent to this station as part of a routine mission, and now his very presence was threatening to tear it apart. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the occasional hum of the station's systems. Drake couldn't stop thinking about Lyra, about the way she had looked at him, the way her lips had felt against his. There was something more between them, something deeper than just a biological reaction. But now, everything was at risk. Suddenly, his comm device chimed. It was Lyra. Drake. Her voice came through, urgent and strained. You need to come to the lab. Now. Drake didn't hesitate. He bolted from his quarters, racing down the sterile corridors until he reached the lab. When he stepped inside, he found Lyra standing by the central console, her hands trembling as she worked furiously on the holoscreens. What's going on? Drake asked, breathless. Lyra glanced up, her face pale and her violet eyes filled with fear. I've found the cause. Drake's heart pounded in his chest. What is it? Lyra pulled up a detailed scan of Drake's DNA, highlighting a specific sequence. It's not just pheromones. Your genetic code is interacting with the station's environment in ways we didn't anticipate. The atmospheric composition, the radiation levels, even the station's artificial gravity, everything is amplifying your body's natural signals. Drake stared at the data, trying to make sense of it. But why? Why is this happening to me? Lyra's lips trembled as she spoke. Because you're not entirely human anymore. Drake blinked, his mind going blank. What? Lyra pointed to the sequence on the screen. There's something in your DNA that doesn't match any known human genome. It's alien. I don't know how, but you've been altered genetically. And whatever did this to you, it's using you as a conduit. Drake felt the floor drop out from under him. Alien? Altered? None of this made sense. How did this happen? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lyra shook her head. I don't know. But the more time you spend on this station, the more dangerous it becomes. If we don't stop this, the entire crew could be affected. Drake swallowed hard, his mind reeling. He wasn't just a human caught in a biological anomaly, he was the anomaly. And whatever had been done to him, it was spreading. Can you stop it? He asked, his voice tight. Lyra hesitated, her eyes filled with regret. There's one way. But it's risky. Drake stepped closer, his heart pounding. What is it? Lyra met his gaze, her voice barely a whisper. We need to reset your DNA. Drake's blood ran cold. You mean to change me back? Yes, Lyra said, her voice trembling. But the process could kill you. We'd have to use an experimental device, something that rewrites genetic code. If it doesn't work... Drake exhaled, his mind spinning. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. But there was no other choice. Do it, he said firmly. We have to stop this. Lyra hesitated for a moment, then nodded, her expression resolute. I'll start the procedure. She led him to a large cylindrical chamber in the center of the lab. As Drake stepped inside, he glanced back at Lyra, who was already preparing the controls. Lyra, he called out, his voice softer now. If this doesn't work... She looked up, her eyes shimmering with emotion. It will. The chamber closed around him, and the hum of the machinery filled the air. Drake closed his eyes, taking one last breath as the machine activated, the sensation of his very DNA unraveling overwhelming him. As his consciousness faded, his last thought was of Lyra, of her lips, her touch, and the strange, dangerous connection between them. Then everything went dark. When Drake awoke, the world felt different. His body was sore, his mind hazy, but the overwhelming pull he'd felt for so long, the dangerous energy coursing through him, was gone. He was normal again. Lyra was standing by his side, her eyes filled with relief and something more. It worked, she whispered. Drake smiled weakly. I guess I owe you one. Lyra leaned down, her lips brushing his gently, this time with no pheromones, no external forces. Just them. You don't owe me anything, she whispered. And for the first time since arriving on the station, Drake felt at peace. End of story.